There's a certain kind of pain that comes when someone looks you in the eye and calls you useless. It's not just an insult, it's a sentence that stings deep enough to echo inside your mind long after the moment has passed. The word becomes a shadow that follows you everywhere, reminding you of every failure, every mistake, every time you weren't enough in someone else's eyes. It starts as a whisper from others, but before long, it becomes your own voice, questioning your worth, your purpose, your very existence. You begin to wonder if maybe they're right, if maybe you were never meant to shine, if maybe your life will always be a series of attempts that never quite reach success. You wake up each day with that label wrapped around your soul, pretending it doesn't hurt, but deep down, you feel it digging deeper, carving out the parts of you that once believed in something more. People underestimate the power of words. They think a single insult fades with time, but it doesn't. It lingers. It festers. Every time someone calls you useless, they plant a seed of doubt in your heart. Over time, that seed grows into a forest of insecurity that blocks out the light of your confidence. You start second-guessing every decision, overthinking every step, replaying every failure in your head like a broken record. And the worst part? The people who say it often don't even realize the damage they've done. To them, it's just a careless word, a moment of frustration, a joke. But to the one on the receiving end, it's a scar that doesn't fade. You carry it into every new opportunity, every dream you try to chase, every conversation where you hope to be seen differently. There's an emptiness that settles in when you're constantly told you have no value. It changes the way you look at yourself. You stop trying to stand out because standing out only invites more criticism. You start shrinking into the background, convincing yourself that maybe invisibility is safer than rejection. You watch others succeed while you stay silent, clapping for them but secretly wondering why success always seems to skip over you. You smile when people talk about their achievements, but inside, you're fighting the voice that says, you'll never get there. You're not like them. It becomes a lonely battle between who you are and who you want to be. And yet, in that loneliness, something begins to stir. The pain doesn't just break you, it shapes you. Every time someone calls you useless, a tiny part of you wants to prove them wrong. You don't say it out loud, but deep inside, you start collecting those words like fuel. You remember every insult, every laugh, every time someone walked away when you needed them most. You replay those moments not out of bitterness, but because they remind you what you're fighting against. It's in those quiet nights, when you feel most defeated, that a small fire begins to burn. It's not a flame of anger, it's a flame of purpose. You start asking yourself what would happen if you stopped believing them, if you stopped letting their words define who you are. The truth is, being called useless doesn't destroy everyone the same way. For some, it crushes their spirit, for others, it awakens something powerful. It becomes the reason they push harder, stay longer, try again when everyone else gives up. You start to realize that maybe the people who called you useless were never meant to see your worth in the first place. Maybe their words weren't a reflection of who you are, but a reflection of what they couldn't understand about you. They judged you by what they saw at that moment, not by what you were capable of becoming. They look. So you keep walking through the pain, carrying those words on your back, not as a burden but as a reminder. Every useless you've ever heard becomes a reason to rise. Every laugh behind your back becomes motivation to keep going. And while they think you're still the same broken person they once dismissed, you're quietly rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, stronger than before. Because deep down, even in your weakest moments, you know that the ones who are called useless often turn out to be the ones who change everything. When the noise of judgment finally fades and you're left alone with your thoughts, that's when the real battle begins. The world may have called you useless, but in the silence that follows, you start to listen to a different kind of voice, the one that comes from within. It's faint at first, almost too quiet to notice, buried under the weight of every insult and disappointment. You start to look at yourself not through the eyes of others but through the cracks in your own reflection. The pain forces you inward, into a space where the noise of the world can't reach, and there you begin the slow, fragile process of rediscovering who you are. It's not an easy journey, because self-discovery rarely is. It demands that you face everything you've been running from, the doubt, the fear, the belief that maybe you'll never be enough. But in confronting those things, you begin to see that you were never useless, you were just misunderstood, underestimated, unseen. In those quiet moments of solitude, something shifts. You stop chasing validation and start searching for meaning. You begin to realize that your worth was never something others could define or destroy. It was always there, buried beneath layers of hurt and insecurity, waiting for you to notice it again. You remember the dreams you once had, the things that made your heart race, the passions you silenced because someone told you they didn't matter. You pick them up again, one by one, dusting th. Every day becomes a test of patience and courage. There are moments when you want to give up, when the old voices return, whispering that you'll never be enough. But there's also a quiet determination growing stronger inside you. You begin to understand that self-discovery isn't about becoming someone new, it's about returning to who you were before the world convinced you otherwise. You stop seeking approval from those who never understood you and start building a life that feels real. You try new things, fail again, learn, and keep going. The failures don't break you anymore, they teach you. Each mistake becomes a map, showing you where not to go and what truly matters. The more time you spend with yourself, the clearer things become. You start noticing the little victories, the way you handle pressure better than before, the way you don't flinch at criticism like you used to, the way you find peace in your own company. You begin to like who you are, not because the world tells you to, but because you finally see the strength that was always there. You learn that silence can be a friend, that solitude isn't loneliness but clarity. In those hours when no one else is around, you uncover truths that were hidden beneath years of noise. You start to see patterns, reasons behind the pain, lessons behind every betrayal. And though it hurts to face them, you know that this pain is shaping you into someone wiser. People often say that struggle builds character, but what they don't tell you is that it also builds understanding. You start to understand yourself, not the version that tries to please everyone, but the real one, raw and honest. You realize what you truly want, who truly matters, and what kind of life will make you feel alive. The process is messy, it's filled with tears, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt. But in between all that, there are sparks of realization that light up the darkness. You start to see that the world's definition of useless doesn't appl. And then, one day, without even realizing it, you begin to move differently. There's a calmness in your steps, a quiet strength in your words. You don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore because you finally understand your own value. The opinions that once broke you no longer have power over you. You found something far greater, self-respect. You've seen what it means to rebuild from nothing, to stand on the ashes of what they tried to destroy and still find beauty in yourself. You stop craving acknowledgement and instead focus on growth, peace, and purpose. You become your own source of motivation, your own reason to keep going. And that's when true transformation begins, when you stop searching for who you should be and start embracing who you've always been underneath the noise. There comes a moment when all the pain, humiliation, and rejection you've faced turns into something else entirely. It's not instant, it doesn't happen with a single thought or decision, but rather it builds slowly, almost quietly, beneath the surface. Every harsh word that once broke you begins to take on a different meaning. You stop hearing it as an insult and start feeling it as fuel. The fire inside you, once dimmed by doubt, starts to grow stronger. You realize that every person who called you useless handed you a reason to rise, every failure gave you a lesson they could never teach, and every time they laughed at you, they unknowingly gave you another reason to prove them wrong. Rejection stops feeling like the end, it becomes the very foundation on which you build your comeback. You begin to see the beauty in struggle. What once felt like punishment now feels like preparation. You start to notice that pain has been training you for something far greater than their approval. You no longer seek validation because you're too busy becoming better. Every setback starts to look like a test of how badly you want your dreams. You learn to channel your frustration into focus, There's power in quiet progress. You don't announce your plans anymore, you just work. You don't argue when someone doubts you, you let your results speak. You stop explaining yourself to people who never cared to understand, and instead, you put all that energy into growth. It's not about proving them wrong anymore, it's about proving yourself right. The same rejection that once felt unbearable now fuels a discipline you never had before. You wake up earlier, push harder, and stay consistent even when no one is watching. You begin to crave the process more than the praise because you finally realize that the real victory isn't in showing off your success, it's in becoming someone who no longer needs to. As time goes on, you start noticing subtle changes. The things that used to break you no longer have the same power. The words that once hurt you now bounce off like rain on armor. You've been through too much to let small minds shake your peace. You carry yourself differently, with quiet confidence instead of loud desperation. You're no longer chasing after people who made you feel small, you're too busy building something that will outlast their opinions. The fear of failure that once paralyzed you now motivates you. You know failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the path to it. You start to see that every no you heard was simply redirecting you toward the right yes. You also begin to understand that motivation isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's silent, subtle, and deeply personal. It's in those moments when you look back and remember how far you've come, how many times you could have quit but didn't. You realize that the fire inside you is no longer driven by anger, it's driven by purpose. The pain you once resented becomes the reason you're able to push through when others give up. You stop blaming others for what happened and start thanking them in your mind, because without their rejection, you might have never discovered your strength. As your motivation grows, so does your clarity. You see what truly matters and what doesn't. You stop wasting time trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You begin to surround yourself with people who believe in growth, not gossip, people who challenge you, not doubt you. The noise of negativity begins to fade because you've tuned into something stronger, the sound of your own progress. You start setting goals that scare you, not because you want to impress others, but because you've realized what you're capable of. The more you achieve, the less you feel the need to prove it. You're not running away from your past anymore, you're running toward your potential. And even though the memory of being called useless still lingers, it no longer feels like a wound. It feels like a story, one you've rewritten with your actions. You understand now that rejection was never the enemy, it was the catalyst. Without it, you might have never discovered how much power you hold within. You might have never learned to turn pain into progress, doubt into drive, and failure into fuel. Each moment of rejection became a spark that built the fire inside you. You're not the same person they dismissed, you're the result of every moment they underestimated you. And now, the very words they once used to break you have become the reason you refuse to stop rising. There's a kind of strength that only grows in solitude, the kind that doesn't come from applause or validation, but from surviving your own silence. When the world turns its back on you, when the people who were supposed to believe in you disappear, you're left with nothing but yourself. At first, it feels like punishment, like the universe has stripped everything away just to watch you fall. You sit in the quiet, surrounded by the echoes of what people said about you, and it's hard not to believe them. The loneliness feels heavier than failure, because now there's no one left to prove wrong, no one left to listen. But as you start to build a routine, not because anyone told you to, but because it becomes your anchor. You wake up early, you work on yourself, you set small goals, and you chase them quietly. There's no one to notice, no one to applaud, and that's what makes it real. Each small victory feels personal, sacred even. You start to find comfort in your own company, to appreciate the moments when no one is watching. The pain that once made you feel weak starts turning into a kind of resilience that doesn't break easily. You learn that being alone doesn't mean being abandoned, it means being given the chance to rebuild without interference. You begin to trust your own decisions, to rely on your instincts, to follow your own rhythm instead of moving to someone else's beat. The world outside might still see you as the same person they dismissed, but inside, everything is changing. The silence that once felt unbearable now feels necessary. You stop explaining yourself because there's no one to explain to, and you start acting, moving, improving. You become your own teacher, your own motivation, your own guide. The solitude sharpens your mind and strengthens your spirit. You notice how distractions fade away when you're not constantly seeking approval. You read more, think more, observe more. You start understanding people better, not because you're talking to them, but because you've finally learned how to listen. There are still moments when the loneliness hits hard, when you wish someone could see how hard you're trying. But then you remember that the best growth always happens unseen. The seed doesn't bloom in the sunlight, it grows in the dark, buried deep in the soil, surrounded by silence. That's exactly what you're doing, growing quietly beneath the surface while the world forgets you exist. And one day, when you finally rise, they won't understand how it happened so suddenly. They won't see the sleepless nights, the silent battles, the countless times you picked yourself up. You start to notice how much stronger your mind has become. The things that used to break you now barely move you. The opinions that once mattered no longer hold weight. You've built walls around your peace, not to keep people out, but to protect the calm you've earned. Solitude teaches you boundaries. It teaches you that not everyone deserves access to your energy. You learn that you don't need constant company to feel fulfilled. You begin to find joy in simple things, a quiet morning, a long walk, the sound of your own breathing. You realize that the best conversations you'll ever have are the ones you have with yourself. In that space of isolation, creativity begins to bloom. You start to imagine possibilities you never allowed yourself to before. You take risks, try new things, and make mistakes without fear because no one is watching. Failure doesn't scare you anymore because you've learned how to survive it. You stop waiting for the right time or the right people and start doing things just for you. You begin to build a life that reflects who you truly are, not who others said you should be. The solitude that once felt like a curse becomes your sanctuary, your training ground. You emerge from it stronger, calmer, wiser. People eventually notice the change. They see the confidence in your eyes, the stillness in your presence, the quiet power that doesn't need to shout. They'll ask what happened, how you changed, what your secret is. But you'll know the truth, that your strength didn't come from what they gave you, but from what they took away. It came from being forced to depend on yourself, from facing every doubt alone, from standing in your own darkness until your own light started to shine. Solitude taught you to stop waiting for someone to rescue you and start becoming your own savior. It taught you that peace isn't found in people or possessions, but in the quiet acceptance of who you are when no one else is around. As the days pass, you realize you're no longer afraid of being alone. You've built something within yourself that no one can take away. The loneliness that once haunted you has turned into independence. You've stopped chasing love that costs your peace, stopped begging for validation that was never meant for you. You've discovered that the most powerful version of yourself is the one that stands alone, steady and unshaken. The solitude that once broke you has now become the reason you can't be broken again. There comes a point when the work you've done in silence begins to take shape, when the effort that once went unnoticed starts to bear fruit. It doesn't happen overnight, but through countless days of persistence, failure, and growth. The transformation creeps in quietly. You don't even realize how far you've come until one day, you catch your reflection and hardly recognize yourself. The person who once carried the weight of other people's words now stands lighter, sharper, stronger. The pain that used to define you has turned into power. The doubt that once held you back has become discipline. You start to see yourself differently, not as the broken one, but as the builder, the survivor, the creator of your own destiny. You remember where you started, but you no longer live there. You've outgrown that version of yourself, and there's no going back. Every small victory feels monumental because you know what it cost to get here. Every skill you've mastered, every door you've opened, every moment of confidence, it all came from those long nights when no one believed in you. You start to realize that your transformation isn't about becoming someone new, it's about revealing who you always were underneath the layers of hurt. The same heart that once ached now beats with purpose. The same mind that once doubted now creates, plans, and leads. You begin to understand that success is not just measured by what you achieve but by how deeply you've changed along the way. As you grow, people begin to notice. The same ones who dismissed you start to ask questions, their tone shifting from mockery to curiosity. They see the changes on the outside, but they'll never truly grasp the war you fought within. They see your confidence, but not the countless nights of self-doubt. They see your success, but not the failures that built it. You've learned that transformation isn't about showing them what you've become, it's about knowing, deep within, that you no longer need their approval. You carry yourself differently now. There's no desperation in your energy, no need to prove anything. You've learned to let your actions speak louder than any defense you could ever give. The transformation doesn't just happen in how you act, it happens in how you think. You no longer see obstacles as threats, but as tests. When things fall apart, you no longer panic, you adapt. You stop waiting for opportunities and start creating them. You stop fearing mistakes because you know every misstep teaches you something valuable. The fear that used to paralyze you has turned into focus. You no longer waste energy trying to control everything, you trust the process. You understand that real growth is messy, uncomfortable, and often lonely, but it's also the most honest thing you'll ever experience. Every scar tells a story of endurance, every bruise a reminder that you made it through. You also start to notice how your priorities shift. What once mattered no longer does. You care less about being seen and more about being real. You stop chasing validation and start seeking purpose. The people who once drained your energy no longer have access to you, because you've learned how to guard your peace. You start investing your time in things that build you, not break you. The noise of the world fades because you've found your rhythm. You've realized that the path to transformation isn't glamorous, it's raw, it's painful, and it's deeply personal. And yet, it's the most reva. As your world begins to change, so does your environment. The energy you give out starts attracting people who understand, who respect, who build. You begin to see that you don't need to beg for acceptance when you stand in authenticity. People are drawn to your strength, but what they don't see is how much solitude it took to build it. You've learned to move with grace through chaos, to stay grounded when everything around you shakes. You no longer react to negativity, you rise above it. You become the calm in your own storm. That's the true mark of transformation, not that you've escaped pain, but that you've learned how to navigate through it without losing yourself. There's a quiet pride that grows within you as you look back. You start to understand why everything happened the way it did. The rejections, the betrayals, the loneliness, they all served a purpose. They weren't meant to break you, they were meant to shape you. Every time someone doubted you, it planted another reason to rise. Every failure pushed you closer to the version of yourself you were meant to become. You no longer resent your past, you respect it. It taught you resilience, patience, and the power of self-belief. You finally see that every wound had a reason, every loss a lesson. When the transformation is complete, you don't need to announce it. You simply live it. Your presence begins to speak for itself. The same people who once overlooked you now can't ignore you. They wonder how you changed so much, but the truth is, you didn't change overnight, you just stopped holding yourself back. You stopped letting their voices control your choices. You started living for yourself. You've discovered the strength that comes from rebuilding quietly, from trusting your own path, from refusing to stay broken. And as you walk through life now, you carry with you not just the memory of pain, but the proof that you were never useless, you were simply in the process of becoming unstoppable. There's a moment that every fighter dreams of, the moment when the tables finally turn, when the people who once looked down on you suddenly find themselves looking up. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause, it comes quietly, in the way life rearranges itself without warning. One day, they need something only you can give. One day, they find themselves in the position you once were, reaching for help, and realizing the same person they called useless now holds the power to make a difference. It's not about revenge, it's about realization. You don't need to say anything, because your success says it all. You see the same faces that once doubted you now wearing expressions of disbelief, confusion, and regret. The satisfaction isn't in watching them fall, it's in knowing that you rose. They used to laugh when you tried. They used to whisper when you failed. They used to think your dreams were foolish, your efforts meaningless. But now, everything has changed. The same people who once overlooked you now hesitate before speaking your name. The same ones who turned away now want to be associated with you. They begin to remember every word they threw at you, every time they dismissed your worth, and they realize how wrong they were. Life has a way of bringing people face to face with their mistakes, and when it does, you don't need to remind them. They feel it in the silence between your success and their regret. You remember all the times you stood alone, all the nights when no one believed in you. You remember how it felt to be invisible, to shout into the void and get no answer. And now, the contrast is almost poetic. The same silence that once felt like punishment now feels like power. You no longer crave their attention or approval, because you've built something stronger, self-respect. You learned how to survive without them, and now they're the ones trying to survive without you. It's not arrogance that fills you, it's peace. You no longer need to prove them wrong, be. The world looks different from where you stand now. The same obstacles that once felt impossible now seem small. The people who used to intimidate you now seem human. You realize that all along, it wasn't them who held the power, it was you. You just hadn't recognized it yet. Every failure, every insult, every rejection was pushing you toward this moment. The transformation wasn't about changing for them, it was about becoming who you were always meant to be. And now that you're here, standing in the light of your own making, you understand that success tastes different when it's built from the ashes of humiliation. It's not sweet because of pride, it's fulfilling because of truth. They begin to depend on you in ways they never imagined. They need your knowledge, your help, your approval. You watch as they struggle to find the words, trying to mask their discomfort with politeness. You see the pride they once wore crumble under the weight of their own realization. It's not that you wanted them to suffer, it's that you wanted them to understand. To understand how much strength it took to get here. To understand what it means to be underestimated and still rise. You don't gloat or mock them, you simply carry yourself with quiet grace, because deep down, you know life has already given you the justice you deserve. There's a strange calmness in this kind of victory. It's not loud or dramatic, it's silent and steady. You find yourself forgiving them, not because they asked, but because you no longer need to hold on to the past. The anger that once fueled you slowly fades, replaced by a kind of wisdom that only growth can bring. You understand now that their words were never really about you, they were about their own limitations, their own inability to see beyond their narrow vision. You've outgrown their opinions, their expectations, and their version of you. You've become someone they can no longer define. And yet, there's a part of you that still remembers. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. You remember the version of yourself who once cried in frustration, who doubted everything, who wondered if things would ever change. You carry that memory like a reminder of how far you've come. It keeps you humble, grounded, grateful. It reminds you that power isn't about control, it's about endurance. It's about staying true to yourself even when no one else believes in you. The people who once saw nothing in you now see everything they couldn't be, and that's what makes them uncomfortable. But you no longer need their discomfort to validate your success. You've built a life that speaks for itself. As time goes on, you realize that what once felt like revenge has turned into redemption. You no longer want to hurt them, you want to inspire. You want your story to be proof that no one stays powerless forever, that even the most broken beginnings can lead to the most powerful endings. You understand that your strength was never meant to destroy, it was meant to demonstrate. You become an example, a reminder that what people say about you has nothing to do with what you're capable of. The same ones who called you useless now use your name as an example of success, not realizing how deeply ironic that is. You don't need to remind them who you are, they already know. And in that quiet moment, when you look around and see how everything has changed, you realize that the best revenge isn't making them suffer, it's making yourself unstoppable. It's living so fully, so fearlessly, that the opinions that once defined you lose all meaning. It's watching the same people who once pitied you now respect you without understanding how it happened. They can't survive without the strength you built in solitude, without the wisdom that came from your struggle, without the resilience that was born from their rejection. And though they may never admit it, deep down, they know that the person they on